Dr. Lucky, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. It's so nice to have you here.
It's so nice to meet you, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me.
of course, of course. And what I'm even more excited about is your new book that is going to be on bookshelves very soon. It's called The Lucky Egg: Understanding Your Fertility and How to Get Pregnant Now. Congratulations on your new book. It's beautiful. I love the title. I love the cover. Tell us what we can expect on the inside. Tell us what inspired you to write the book, obviously based on your professional background, but just tell us what people can expect when they buy it.
I would love to. So, what inspired me to write this book was the years of conversations I've had with patients where it just seems very prevalent, this knowledge gap. And people come in with so little information and knowledge on how their bodies work and what's normal and what's not normal. And on top of that, then if they are faced with an infertility diagnosis and need to navigate treatment, they're going from 0 to 60. And all of a sudden, they have to learn what feels like a new language as they navigate tests and treatment options. And I just feel like we need a level playing field. It's almost like we need a health class 2.0 to fill in all of the knowledge gaps that we really ideally should learn in our early 20s. Everyone should understand, what does it mean to ovulate? And what does it mean if your periods are irregular or heavy or painful? And how to best optimize your health if you're looking to get pregnant in the near future or one day down the road. And what is the biological clock? So, this book is really an all encompassing resource that I like to call a fertility Bible of sorts, because it's not just for someone who's in the trenches of IVF and who's, already down a path. It's really a holistic 360 view for preparing for pregnancy, what you need to know, and when to seek help, insider information on things like how to find a good clinic. What is a good clinic? Because, as an insider, I know how I judge if I'm helping a friend or family member who's out of state who can't come to one of my colleagues in my clinic. How do I help them decipher which one to go to in their area? And what are the things that I'm looking for? And then also, what are the tests? Because it feels like there's a zillion tests, but in reality, we can really simplify it down to, let's test the 4 major components of what it takes to get pregnant: your ovaries, your tubes, your uterus, and the sperm. And so just breaking things down in a way that feels less overwhelming and scary to people, and saying, listen, you may not need help, you may not need treatment, but here's a way to streamline your approach now and go into pregnancy the healthiest version of yourself that you can be. And so there's a lot of lifestyle guidance. But if you run into trouble, this is when you should see someone. This is how you find a good person and a good lab, a good clinic. And here are your options for tests and for treatments. And then here's the stuff that's experimental that maybe you've read about on message boards online, but you don't really need to focus so much on these extraneous things because there's a lot of noise. And I think that just feels very tiring and overwhelming before someone even embarks on getting to the point where they're like, I'm ready to get pregnant. It just feels like there's so much unsolicited advice and noise. So I really wanted to drown that out and put together a resource that covers it all. And if you are someone who is dealing with failed cycles and you are in those IVF trenches that I was talking about, there's a whole section for you too about when things don't go as planned with egg retrievals, embryo transfers, miscarriages, ectopic pregnancy. It's everything you can think of. And there's mental health infused throughout, which is why I'm so excited to talk to you, a mental health professional, about the book.
Yeah, no, that's the part that I feel like is missing sometimes in literature. And so I'm glad you brought that up and brought that into your book, because I feel like, everyone, you focus so much on the physicality of everything, like you said, all the testing and all the biological components and the physical components, which are absolutely necessary. And, you have to, I mean, that's the biology of getting pregnant. But there's so much mental health that goes along with it. Even like you said, prepping to even, okay, am I ready to get pregnant? Because I feel like a lot of times people feel like they have to check off all these boxes first. I need to
Yeah.
travel first. I need to take care of this first, or get, settled into my career, just whatever the case may be. And it becomes more of either an obligation or just something they check off their box, because there's so much anxiety of, okay, what if I get pregnant now? Now's not the best time. And,
Mm-hmm.
even just the prep of it can
Control.
be
You want
anxiety ridden.
control. Yeah.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
think there is an aspect to this, and this is actually why I called my book The Lucky Egg. Most people think it's just because my first name is unique, Lucky. But I actually wanted to illustrate that while science can get you so far, and there's so much we know and we can test, and there's so many different ways that we can try to target direct causes of infertility, There is a lot that we still don't know. Like we don't even have a test for egg quality, right? So we're making guesses, educated guesses based on someone's age. This is what we think your egg and resulting embryo quality might be. So there is still a lot of imprecision, and there are still things that we cannot explain. Like the patient who's had multiple failed cycles, who then on a whim got pregnant in between cycles on their own, just with timed intercourse, right? How do you explain those things? And I don't say this to make people feel more anxious or like, oh, there's nothing we can do. It's out of our hands. It's all luck. It's not. There are ways to set yourself up for success, but there isn't like a distinct formula, that works for everyone. It's like everyone is a unique individual, and there is some element of chance and serendipity in the fact that at any age you can still ovulate a healthy egg. And this is why some women can get pregnant on their own without my help in their 40s, and others may have a harder time because there's things that you cannot control in this process. And I think we have to surrender ourselves to that a little bit. So when you talk about the conversation with patients of like, now's not a great time, but I want to be pregnant this month because I want to have my child on this, in this season or this part of the calendar year. And it's like, I think the minute you relinquish some control and say, you know what, I'm putting myself out there in this situation, but I know that I can't control every aspect. I actually think that helps relieve a lot of anxiety. I think it's when we try to control everything and we're not successful at being able to control it, it can lead to a major letdown and just feeling so much more anxious and out of control.
Yeah, exactly. Or feeling like in my case, I remember having the thermometer where you wake up first thing in the morning, you take your temperature to see if you're ovulating and you can't move. And so I try to, roll over on the bed as quietly, as quickly as I can, put it in my mouth, document it. And it just became such a procedure. It didn't even make it like fun anymore. Just took
Yeah.
it kind of sucked it out because I was trying. And yes, and yes, that method maybe helped me at the end of the day, but there was so much I was trying to control. And, like you said, there's a lot of noise. So it was, what kind of food should I be eating? What type of supplement
Yes,
should I be taking? And there's just a lot of components that go into the pressure of
absolutely.
especially the older you get. And I was over 35 for both of my pregnancies. So,
Hmm.
I just know there's a lot of stigma still around, at least for the moms I talk to, since I am an older
Hmm.
mom myself, about the geriatric pregnancy. I don't know if they still call it that, but when I had kids 12 years ago, starting 12 years ago, it was, geriatric. And you just feel already that you're already at like a deficit of even trying to get pregnant if you're over 35 or even
Yeah.
at 35 and over. And do you see that still happening in your practice and with the patients you have?
Well, I can tell you that I've been doing this for a long time and I've never ever used the term geriatric pregnancy. And maybe it's regional. I'm in New York City and I don't know, maybe it's a little bit more normalized for a longer period of time that people have been having kids in their late 30s and their 40s, but I've just never heard that be a term that's thrown around even when I was working on the labor floor delivering babies for
Mm.
women over 35. We never said geriatric. There is a term called AMA, advanced maternal age. So maybe it's semantics, but I do think that that's a little bit less harsh than saying
Oh,
geriatric. When I think geriatric, I think senior citizen, like a
right.
curly hair, gray hair, like old granny with glasses and a walker. And that's far from the picture of what it means to be pregnant in your late 30s, 40s. It's a very different era. We have learned how to take better care of our bodies. We have way more knowledge about nutrition, and I think, I was talking to my husband about this the other day. He was saying how it's so crazy how many people thought it was okay to smoke. Now that's become less of a thing. So I think we are getting better and better over time. And I think we're looking younger and probably biologically a little bit younger. Now, has that translated into changes in what we think about egg quality as we age? No, not really. The research doesn't show that. But I do think there is a lifestyle component. There are things that we can definitely do to speed up the aging process in our ovaries, like smoking. We know that. It can accelerate the age that you go into menopause at a younger age, and it can really impact egg quality. So, what you do matters. I don't want to say that it's all up to chance or luck, but you can't control everything, and there is some element of it that where it's not a meritocracy, right? It is a little bit more like, for some people it can go easily and for other people it can be more challenging. It's not a matter of merit or them not doing the right things or trying hard enough. And I think that that absolves people of a lot of self-blame and guilt. And that's really the deeper meaning behind the book title. And I think another thing that I get asked about a lot while we're on the subject of the book title is, are you claiming that this book is going to tell us how to get pregnant right now in this minute? No. But half of my practice is dealing with fertility preservation. And the other half are people that are trying to get pregnant now, or maybe even like yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really a book for everyone. Understanding your fertility, because that's at baseline what everyone should be doing, no matter how far out they think they are from wanting to build their family. That fundamental knowledge can help you in so many ways. So just understanding your fertility and your reproductive health, but also how to get pregnant now, and then also how to plan for the future. I mean, I really think it has to be all encompassing for people to really have a clear understanding and to be able to help themselves. Not everyone should need fertility treatment or need to come to me. I would love nothing more than for people to just get pregnant before they even reach my doorstep. But I think it's about really having the adequate mental preparation and information so that they're timing their attempts properly. There's only like 3 days out of the month where it's high yield to even try. And so when people come to me and they're like, I've just been trying without timing anything, I'm not even tracking my cycle, that's valuable time that they could have used more wisely.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to kind of spend the second half of our conversation. I definitely want to bring up secondary infertility. So we're going to put that on the shelf for just 1 minute, because I think this, kind of will lead into that. But, and I'm sure you talk about it in your book and deal with it in your practice with your patients often, but of the problems that could come up where maybe pregnancy is harder to achieve, let's say with endometriosis or PCOS or any type of, issue that is, biological, maybe that's something that a woman was born with. And so it just makes it harder for them to get pregnant. Do you go into detail about that? And then also, if you want to talk about a little bit about the mental health behind that, of just, again, all encompassing of when you're dealing with something physical like that or biological that you have no control over, if you have, I don't even know all the issues that could come up, but how does a woman navigate that as they're trying to get pregnant, but they're up against these physical obstacles, and then also that's affecting their mental health, which obviously we know that with raised anxiety and things like that, it can be a trickle down effect.
Yeah, of course. I mean, the book targets every part of the reproductive system and all the things that could go wrong that you need to know about and how to go about figuring out if that's a problem and diagnosing it. And then what is the potential workaround or solution? So it's very action oriented. And I think knowledge is really the key to feeling less out of control or hopeless. Because if you have an action plan for every potential problem and you know how to look for it and you know how to work around it, that's the best we can offer, right? In terms of trying to regain that sense of lost control. Um, I think there's a lot of grief, and I talk about that a lot in each chapter. There is a different level of grief for someone that might have gone through early menopause, premature ovarian failure, they call it, or premature ovarian insufficiency. That's a better term, where you just stop being able to ovulate. And there's only so much that we can really do. Oftentimes people will rely on donor egg in IVF to overcome that. And for someone who is getting this new diagnosis, that is a major mental blow in terms of they never thought that they were going to have this problem, and it can affect them physically and mentally in so many different ways. But it's also now looking at a future that looks different than what you had initially thought, and thinking about things like donor egg, even in your 20s or 30s, and looking to the future and saying, how am I going to discuss this with a future partner? And it just has all these implications. That's different than someone that's gone through many different pregnancy losses, or maybe needs to rely on a surrogate and now has to give up on the dream of carrying a pregnancy. There's a lot of sacrifices and, grief that can be associated with giving up a certain part of the journey and what you envisioned for yourself. And so all of that is addressed separately and very specific to certain problems and certain barriers that people will encounter. Because I don't think that that's ever been done before. I think people just talk about mental health as this like umbrella term. But I think really getting to the heart of the type of grief and acceptance required to be able to move forward with a very particular problem is really helpful. And so that's where I drew on my years of experience treating thousands of patients, because I've kind of seen it all. And I think, giving people the best mental health support so they can stick with it and get to the end of their journey and not drop out of treatment prematurely because they're emotionally burnt out is really the key goal of putting such an emphasis on mental health in the book.
Yeah, exactly. And again, we're going to be talking about secondary infertility in a minute because I definitely dealt with that for about a year and a half before I got pregnant with my second. So I definitely want to dive in more on that. But something else that just popped up when you were talking about grief is since I was an older mom, I went to college and then I went to grad school and end up meeting my husband later in my 30s and getting married later and I remember my mom kept saying, you should have, froze your eggs. Because by the time I actually did have children, and then with the secondary infertility added on to that, it took longer to just to have two children than by the time I was done. I mean, that was it.
Yeah.
And I always think, what would have happened if I would have froze my eggs and then maybe tried to have more children with healthy eggs, in my 40s or in my, even 42, 43, whatever it is. And I think, again, there's the stigma that I know I had, and maybe it is, based on where we're located or not, I'm not sure. But, there was a stigma when I was in my early 40s of you're too old to have kids now. You're going to have
Hmm.
bad eggs, or you're going to have, children with, chromosomal issues or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And it made you scared to even try after a certain age. And
Yeah.
it was scary. And I kind of grieved not being able to have kids anymore, even at 41, 42, when I know you definitely can. But
Right.
it just made it scarier. And that was hard for me to kind of realize and accept, I can't have kids anymore. I'm not going to have kids anymore. That was really hard for me.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think secondary infertility, which for anyone listening who doesn't know what that means, it's where you've already been able to get pregnant and have a child. And then as you're trying to expand your family beyond that, for whether it's for baby number 2 or 3 or whatever your goal is, then you run into trouble. And that can be for a variety of reasons because problems like endometriosis or PCOS or even fibroids, which grow over time, can become more prevalent as we get older. But a big cause, and this is something I experienced personally myself, is just the effect of time and how long it takes for you to go through the first pregnancy and then get through that and raise that first child and then be ready to physically even think about trying to get pregnant again. For me, it was career. It was like, I know that I can't do this again for another 3 years. I need a moment. And so I actually proactively froze embryos with my husband after my first because I recognized that I had a lower egg count. And just knowing everything that I know, I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't a fertility doctor. I know that for a fact. And lo and behold, at 37, it was harder for me to get pregnant because all the stats that I rattle off to all my patients came true for me. And I was very grateful and thankful that I was able to rely on the embryo that I froze. But in that journey of trying to freeze embryos, I had some unexpected things happen. I had a cycle be canceled because I didn't respond well. I had a cycle where I had 2 eggs retrieved and nothing turned into an embryo. And I ended up going down this path that I didn't anticipate. And that's also what led me to really want to emphasize the role of mental health. Because if I, as an expert who has no knowledge gap and understands everything that's happening to me, couldn't intellectualize away the feelings of guilt and self blame and shame that I experienced, then how does a layperson feel when they're going through this, right? So that's when I really gained even more compassion for my patients and where they're coming from with the knowledge base that they have. And really, that's why I tailored this book the way I did, so much so mental health is really a center focus because I just feel like there's not enough support and
Right.
education. People go into it sometimes cocky, thinking, hey, I'm a strong person. I've faced a lot of challenges in my life. And they don't often realize that fertility can be such a marathon. It's not a sprint, and you don't have control. And it can be very isolating and for no reason embarrassing, so that you isolate yourself. You don't talk about it openly with people like you would other problems or challenges in your life.
Oh, yeah, I can relate to that. I felt very alone. And I
Mm-hmm.
was, even as a mental health therapist, I mean, I definitely recognized that I had some depressive symptoms because month after month, you try for over a year and a half and the test keeps coming back negative, negative, negative. One time it did come back positive, but then I lost that baby, very, very soon on because they were testing me very early. So, you know, it's just the load that it landed on me mentally and emotionally, financially, um, physically. It was a lot to handle, and even my own husband, I felt like couldn't relate to me. It was,
Yeah.
if you haven't gone through it, I feel like you don't know. And we mentioned before we started recording that sometimes, people would say things like, well, at least you have one, or you
Oh,
already
that's the
had
worst.
one. And
Yeah.
it made me, or you'd see someone pregnant at the grocery store,
Yeah.
shopping, or one of your friends gets pregnant and you're so happy for them. But
Yeah.
I also felt very, not really jealous or envious, but at the same time, just sad, just very sad for myself that I couldn't
Yeah.
do that too. Like I couldn't give my daughter a sibling, that my body was broken, that I was broken, like it wasn't working that it was supposed to. It was
Mhm.
really hard for me. So, and I
No,
know
it's
so
very
many
isolating
women go
too
through that.
because there's so much qualifying that happens, right? And people mean well, but I think when they say things like, "Well, at least you have one," it's like, how do they know what you envisioned for your future? And I think it's your prerogative. If for you really wanted to have more than one child and you wanted them to have that sibling relationship. I mean, I just think it's so, I think for anyone listening, they should realize like saying things like that is not helpful. It's really minimizing someone's pain and making them feel like they're not allowed to express what they're going through. I had family members, say to me, "It's not a big deal. Like at least you have a child," and that to me was deeply hurtful. I also think they call infertility the best club. Sorry, the worst club to be a part of with the best members. And I do think that the fertility community, if you've ever seen people who have like these private accounts or public accounts that are private in that they don't reveal their true identity, but there's this whole subculture online of people talking about their journeys and sharing their journeys, whether they're doing it disclosing their identity or not. But it is a huge community. And I find that there's less space for women with secondary infertility. There tends to be a lot more focus on the people that have never been able to get pregnant. But I think everyone's journey is valid, and there's less room for people with secondary infertility to really join those spaces and openly complain about what they're going through and commiserate, because there is this sentiment of, well, at least you were able to do it once. And I just think that that's really wrong. And that's why I spend a lot of time online focusing on secondary infertility, because not only have I been through it and I understand those emotions, but also I treat so many women with it. And I think they all really agree and say the same thing, that it's a little bit more isolating than just, traditional infertility cases and stories that you hear about online.
Oh, absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. And I think the hard part for me when I was going through it was that, we did all the tests that they could offer us at this, very prominent, very well respected and known infertility clinic. And the hard part for me was that all the tests came back great.
Mm-hmm.
I had lots of eggs, and they said the quality was good. Apparently, we don't really have testing for that, but from what they told
Correct.
me, they couldn't tell anything was wrong with my eggs. I was, still having regular periods. I was, still in my, mid to late 30s, and my husband's sperm was fine. Everything was fine. And they said the only thing they can even imagine was it was just my age, and
Mm-hmm.
that it was going to be harder for me. And they said, there's no reason you shouldn't get pregnant. I didn't have any other underlying, medical challenge, and it was just a matter of time. But that year and a half felt like it probably aged me 10 years, just going
Yeah.
through it. And finally I did. And we ended up going through 2 rounds of IUI. I never did IVF. I wasn't at that point yet where I was, plus I know
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, the finances is really hard to, to
Yes.
do that, or even a surrogate.
Yeah.
Um, but for in my case, we waited a year and a half or so, did all the testing, just kept trying, doing all the ovulation kits and everything. And then finally the first round of IUI, I guess in my head, I thought, this is it. This is where it's going to happen. And when it failed, I was so perplexed. Just how
Mm-hmm.
could it not? Like, it's on the day, it's going right where it needs to go. How is it still not working? And then
Yeah.
month 2 came along, another IUI, and then we ended up getting pregnant. So, and having a healthy, he's almost 9 now, and having a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby. But it just, I'll never forget what that felt like going through it. It was
Yeah.
very hard, and isolating is a great word for it. So,
And mental preparation is key, right? And I spend a lot of time talking about IUI with my patients and on social media, because I see it time and time again that no matter how much I counsel someone, I think the act of going through the motions and taking the medication to give your body the opportunity or chance to release more than one egg, coming in for a procedure, an insemination, even though it's a low tech, laid back procedure, if you think about what we're doing, we're just trying to boost your chances in a very subtle way by improving the odds of ovulating a healthy egg by allowing you the opportunity to release more than one and getting more sperm delivered closer to the eggs. So it's like speed dating for your reproductive tract, right? If one egg meeting the right sperm is like meeting, the one, going to a speed dating event, you have multiple chances, but that doesn't mean you're going to walk away meeting the one from the first speed dating event you go to. And that's how I explain it to patients. But no matter how much I mentally prepare people that, hey, this is improving your chances, even in your 20s, it's a 20% chance each month that an ovulated egg will actually turn into a pregnancy. It takes time and persistence, and human reproduction is inefficient. If you're doing something like medicated IUI, maybe you're bumping up your chances by like 5%. And even though I give all that counseling, it's the way it's human nature to be like, but I'm putting in effort. So where are the results? And I always have to say, it might take several cycles. Most people that get pregnant with medicated IUI will do so within the first like 4 cycles, maybe within 3 to 6 cycles. At a certain point, just like gambling, you have to know when to hold them and when to fold them, right? And at a certain point, persistence, if it's not paying off, you have to understand, okay, by maybe the 7th or 8th round, your success rates start to level out because you've already had enough chances. And so depending on your age, your goals, and other things that might be going on with you, there has to be kind of a roadmap to say, okay, I'm not going to stay in this treatment option forever. When do I move on? So this is where education comes into play, proper expectation setting, and having a good relationship with your doctor and clinic so that you can kind of have this ongoing dialogue and pivot when needed.
Yeah, and I think the education piece is missing, especially in my case. Like I said, I was doing acupuncture, I was doing all the things that they told me to do that would help me, and I was making myself crazy over it,
Yeah.
and it just it makes it hard when you feel so helpless, and you don't know. And when I first heard those similar statistics at the time when I was going through this, I was floored by it. I thought, gosh, I mean, I didn't know it was this hard. Like, how could it be this
Yeah.
hard? And yeah, it was. And even when I had my babies, talking about just the mental health of it, the expectations of it, I did hypnobirthing classes, and I hired a doula, and I wanted this natural, beautiful birth. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure it would have been beautiful, but my body, both times with both pregnancies, I never dilated. After 24 to 36 hours of active labor, my body just never went past a 1. I just did not dilate. Like, my body
Mm-hmm.
just didn't do that for whatever reason it was. I still don't
Right.
understand it, but the grief that, and the guilt and the shame that came with that, of my body not working in that way, and ending up in 2 C-sections, which is fine. I'm so glad for a medical intervention, because if we didn't have the C-section, I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't be here and my kids wouldn't be here. So
Right.
I'm grateful for it, but it just, I think we go in even with what kind of birth plan we want and what kind of delivery we want. And sometimes it doesn't always
Control.
end up that way. And
Yeah.
there's a grief process to that too. And like you said, a level of expectations that we, and acceptance, and we need to have, even going into that too. So, and now,
Absolutely.
yeah,
I
I was
agree. I
saying,
think I think it's about expectations. And if you set too many of them and you set them too high in a way that just doesn't line up with the reality of our biology, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment. And so, when I'm listening to you talk, I'm like, I had 2 C-sections too, but as a OBGYN that's done so many deliveries, my first baby was breech and I knew she wasn't going to turn. It just made sense because she had been breech from 24 weeks on. I was like, okay, I'll do a C-section. And I just like was like, whatever comes my way comes. Like, I just want a healthy pregnancy, a healthy baby. And I think that that is a very healthy attitude when it comes to stuff like in healthcare, because you can't always control your biology. And I think it's good to have a framework and mental preparation, but you have to be flexible.
yeah. And I think the stigma about it is, like, that's what we need to get past, because I still talk to women who are actively getting pregnant or are pregnant, about to have a baby. And the way they talk about having a C-section is like, they're in the middle of World War III. Like, they
Yeah.
think it's the worst case scenario ever. And and I'm like, now
Feels
I'm
like
on the other
giving up.
side of it. And I'm like, it's not that bad,
Yeah.
but it's just a stigma behind, having it. And I think, that's what we're trying
Yeah.
to do. So, with your book, I know that's helping in the conversations like we're having right now on the podcast. And now, full circle, just wrapping it up. I was just told by my OBGYN, after multiple symptoms for almost a year now, that I have a 6 centimeter fibroid in my uterus. And now I'm having to have a hysterectomy soon. And so it's just this, and then now the grief and the, of having no reproductive system even in my body anymore, is a
Yeah.
whole kind of full circle of where I started, trying to get pregnant and where I am now, 12 plus years later is, just dealing with that. I know a lot of women deal with it much sooner than I am at my age
Mhm.
and maybe haven't even had children yet. So there's so many directions, we definitely go in, but I know you cover probably all of it in your book.
I
So
do.
tell us where we can find that, where people can get your book.
So it's everywhere. It's available for pre-order, but it's going to be on bookshelves and in your hands January 13th, but you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, online, you name it. There's also an audiobook, but pre-orders of the hardcover book really help drive this book into more bookstores and get it on more shelves. And my goal here is to really make a huge impact beyond the four walls of my clinic and bring that bedside manner and counseling and clear understanding to more than just my patients. And that's why I spend so much energy and time online giving free advice and educational content. But this is just more than you can ever relay in a 2,200 character limit caption on Instagram. I find the information online on the grid is just so fragmented. So I'm so excited to have a cohesive resource, which I really think is going to be like a fertility Bible. And I hope people will gift it to the women in their lives who, as they turn 20 something, I think everyone should have this. It should be mandatory required reading. It's really health class 2.0, and it's about setting the foundation before you even start trying.
Well, thank you for finding the void in our space and filling in that gap with your book, with all this knowledge and spending time with us today, sharing all of your insights and wisdom with us. Hopefully, people will find you. We'll share your Instagram handle and your website and where to buy the book in the podcast notes, so they can just go right to that and then contact you and get to know you more and your educational content even more after that. So, Dr. Lucky, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. This was such a wonderful conversation. And thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing everything that you did. I know that it helps so many people, and I really appreciate this conversation.